The blast rolled through the jungle like the heartbeat of the earth, the shockwave knocking trees to the ground and sending dirt and ash spiraling into the air. Carter hit the ground first, his body thrown forward by the force, his ears ringing his, vision white with dust. He could taste metal on his tongue, the smell of burning fuel thick in his throat behind him. The rest of the team scrambled for cover, their voices faint through the roar of falling debris. The light had vanished as quickly as it came, leaving only smoke and silence that felt too heavy to breathe. Carter pushed himself up slowly, the ground beneath him, hot, trembling, still alive with the echo of what had just happened. The clearing was gone, replaced by a crater wide and dark and still smoking the edges, glowing faintly red with heat. The jungle around it bent backward. Leaves seared to ash branches snapped and blackened the transmitter. Cross had dropped was gone, the red light extinguished, buried beneath the blast. Wave Carter stared at the destruction heart hammering in his chest. He knew what that kind of detonation meant. Precision burn, evidence removal. Whatever had been in that clearing was erased, completely wiped, as if it had never existed. And yet, he couldn't shake the image of her silhouette standing in the center, untouched by flame. Lowe stumbled to his side, his face streaked with mud and sweat. "Sir, what the hell was that?" Carter didn't answer. His mind racing through possibilities, command, protocols, Black Ops containment. None of it added up. Nothing explained why Cross had been alive or why she had destroyed the only proof of her existence. He looked toward the ridge where the sky had begun to darken, clouds, rolling in fast, unnatural, and low. The air felt charged again. The same static hum from before, crawling across the skin like invisible electricity. Reynolds checked his radio, trying to reach command, but only static answered the same sharp crackle that had filled their comms. Since the strike, Carter turned to the men, gather everything he said. Voice firm, though his pulse was still wild. "We're heading to Extraction Point Delta. We move now before whoever did this comes back." They didn't argue. They trusted him, even when they didn't understand why. And as they started moving through the charred trees, the forest seemed to close in around them, the smell of ozone and smoke growing stronger with every step. The path to the ridge was uneven, twisted with fallen logs and broken roots, but the men pressed forward, driven by something stronger than orders now, by the need to make sense of what they had seen. Halfway up the ridge, Carter stopped motioning for silence. He had heard it faint at first, then clearer a low. Whine from above, familiar, powerful, unmistakable engines, but not close enough for visual. He raised his eyes to the canopy, scanning the gaps in the leaves, and saw it there. A dark shape cutting through the storm clouds, wings wide, engines glowing, like Fire the A-10. The same one, the same burn marks along the fuselage, the same markings along the tail. No escort, no support, just a lone bird flying through the storm. The team froze watching as it banked low over the tree line, circling once then, vanishing into the thick curtain of clouds, as if swallowed by the sky. Reynolds muttered, "She's gone, sir." But his voice carried disbelief, not certainty. Carter didn't respond, his mind replaying the words she had said, "You weren't supposed to." See this containment. He couldn't stop thinking about what it meant. He couldn't stop hearing her voice, calm, resolute, even at the edge of annihilation. He had seen her eyes through the haze, and there had been no fear, only purpose, the kind of purpose that came from knowing something others didn't. Something dangerous. Something she was willing to die to protect. The realization clawed at him with every step down the ridge. By the time they reached the extraction zone, the storm had fully rolled in, rain pounding through the canopy, thunder crashing so close it shook the ground beneath their boots. They found the beacon half buried under wet leaves, its light flickering weak and erratic. Carter set it upright and switched the frequency, hoping the signal would cut through the interference. For minutes, nothing came, then a crackle through the static, followed by a voice command: "Control. This is Ghost Hound actual confirm position over the team, exchanged uncertain glances. Command control. Repeated confirm position over Carter, pressed the transmit key. Ghost Hound actual at grid 279. Extraction Delta, 6 team intact. Repeat intact. Awaiting pickup static again. Then a pause long enough to twist his gut before the voice returned. Ghost Hound actual. Your mission file does not exist. Say again. Your file does not exist. Carter's grip tightened on the radio. What do you mean? Who is this? The line went dead. No response, only the hiss of static. The rain fell harder now. Washing. Mud down the slope. The jungle around them seemed to blur into motion. Trees bending under wind that came from nowhere. Lowe looked at Carter. Eyes wide, sir. What's happening? Carter didn't answer because he didn't know he looked to the sky where. Thunder cracked again, and through the storm he saw it for only a moment. A flash of wings, steel, and smoke. The A-10 again diving through lightning without sound or shadow. The men stood frozen as the engines roared overhead, shaking the air around. The aircraft flew low, impossibly low, cutting through the storm like it belonged there, the thunder following behind it like applause. Carter stepped forward, staring into the sky, rain running down his face, his heart a mix of awe and fear. It couldn't be real, but it was. He could feel it deep inside, like gravity. She was still up there, still fighting something unseen, something bigger than all of them. And as the sound faded into the distance, he knew this wasn't over. Because if she had erased herself from the records, if command denied her existence, then she was working beyond them outside the grid in the dark places where wars were never spoken about. And if she was still flying, it meant something was still coming. The rain did not stop. It came harder, washing away footprints and smoke, until the jungle looked as if nothing had ever happened. The men stood beneath the trees, soaked and silent, waiting for orders that never came. Carter checked his watch again. The extraction. Timer long past due, the radio dead, the beacon dark. They were ghosts now erased from command and from record. The thought sank into him like a stone heavier. With every second he looked at his men, their eyes tired but sharp, still ready but unsure. What they were fighting for anymore. He drew a slow breath and said, "We move east to the river. We find our own way out." They followed without question through mud and rain and wind that cut like wire. The storm above them thundered, but beneath it, another sound began, faint, low, rhythmic, the pulsing echo of engines. Carter stopped. Hand raised, listening, the others froze, heads tilting skyward. The sound grew louder. Closer, the men looked at each other, fear and hope twisting together, because they knew that roar. It was the A-10 again flying low. So low the trees shuddered in its wake. They saw it break through the clouds. Wings wide, lights dead, engines streaked with smoke. The same bird that had saved them and vanished now, back in defiance of reason. The jet banked overhead, cutting a circle above the river. The team ducked under cover, instinctive, even as awe pulled their eyes upward. Carter watched the machine move through the storm, graceful, deadly alive. He could almost see her in, the cockpit helmet glinting under flashes of lightning. Her focus absolute. It was as if the storm itself bent around her path. She dipped lower, flying along the river, tracing their route, guiding them, then climbing sharply, disappearing into clouds. Again, the message was clear. "Follow me," Carter shouted to the men. "Move, she's leading us out." They pushed forward through the downpour, the river growing louder ahead, water churning wild with debris. The A-10's engine roared again somewhere above, them faint but steady, keeping pace as if she refused to leave them. The trees thinned and the water came into view, dark and violent. A small boat half sunken against the bank. Their only chance. Carter motioned for the men to clear it, pushing mud. And vines away, they worked fast, hearts pounding, thunder rolling overhead again. A flash of light lit the sky, followed by a deeper rumble. Not thunder, but explosions far behind them. The ridge where the clearing had been was burning again. Carter turned. back toward the flames, just long enough to see shapes moving through the smoke silhouettes too precise to be shadows. Metallic sharp edges catching lightning drones or machines sweeping low over the treetops. Scanning the jungle, the A-10 dived. From the clouds, engines screaming the sound like rage given form. It fired flares first, then cannon rounds tearing through the sky, lightning and metal and fire colliding as the storm erupted around them. Carter yelled for the men to get to the boat. They leapt aboard, water splashing up cold and dark. Reynolds grabbed the outboard and yanked the cord. The engine sputtered, then came alive, coughing smoke as they pushed off into the current. Above them, the A-10 rolled banking through gunfire. The tracer rounds, slicing through rain and cloud. The machine moved like something possessed one against many wings, flashing bright against the black. The drones exploded one by one, fragments falling into the jungle below, but there were too many. The sky lit with red streaks, chasing her through the clouds. Carter watched helplessly as she turned into the windfire, trailing from one wing, still fighting, still protecting them until a hit struck true. A burst of flame along the fuselage, she kept flying straight, climbing higher and higher into the storm until the clouds swallowed her whole. The men were silent, only the rain and the river filled the space between them. Carter held his gaze, something powerful enough to make the world. Forget her name. The team moved cautiously down the ridge, stepping over burned roots and shattered branches, their boots sinking into soil still hot from the A-10's last run. The air shimmered with heat, and the smell of smoke hung thick enough to sting their throats. Lieutenant Carter led the line, his eyes scanning every shadow as though expecting the jungle to shift and reveal what was hidden. The men followed, silent weapons, ready nerves drawn tight. They had faced ambushes, firefights, even full-scale chaos before. But this silence, this waiting, after the storm felt worse than anything they had known because they were no longer sure who was hunting. Sergeant Lowe signaled for a halt, raising a hand as the team knelt in formation. He pointed toward a tree line where something metallic caught the light through the haze. Carter squinted, seeing the faint reflection of torn aluminum scattered across the mud. The fragments were too small for aircraft debris, yet they glinted like clues, a trail of breadcrumbs leading deeper into the jungle. The air here was heavier, the wind almost gone, and the sound of distant engines still echoed faintly as if trapped between the hills. The men exchanged wary looks, then followed Carter forward one step at a time. The trail led them to a clearing ringed with blackened stumps and the twisted remains of enemy positions. Bullet casings were scattered across the dirt, some still warm to the touch, and footprints crisscrossed the mud, overlapping in chaos. Carter knelt studying them. The enemy had broken fast and scattered into the tree line, moving in panic. But there was something else there. Smaller boots, lighter steps moving with precision. Not retreat. Someone else had been here after the strike. Someone moving on their side, but not part of the team. Carter felt the realization hit slow. Cold and sharp, like a wire tightening around his chest. The pilot had landed. He turned to Lowe, pointing toward the east ridge where the jungle sloped toward. The river. That's where they went, he said. His voice low, steady, the kind that carried command, even when doubt gnawed at the edges. The men followed without hesitation, their senses stretched thin through the noise of the forest, every sound magnified by adrenaline. The radio stayed silent, though Carter kept glancing at it, expecting static or a voice or anything that would confirm what he already suspected, but nothing came, only the hum of insects and the occasional crack of branches underfoot as they moved deeper. The forest closed tighter around them, vines thick as cables hanging from the canopy. Sunlight filtered through in thin green beams. The ground sloped downward into marsh, thicker and darker with every step. The air felt electric, charged as though the earth remembered the roar of engines that had passed overhead. The men spoke little. conserving breath and silence, but every so often one would glance upward through gaps in the leaves, half expecting to see that shape again, cutting through the sky. The fear was not of enemies now. It was of ghosts. Then they found it half buried near the riverbank. The metal gleamed dull and battered, streaked with soot and oil, an access panel torn clean from the undercarriage of an A-10. Carter crouched low, tracing his fingers along the edge, his gloves coming away blackened. It was recent, the heat still clinging to the steel. He turned it over and saw a number stenciled along the side, faint beneath scratches and grime. His breath, caught, because he knew that number he had seen it years ago, burned into briefing files, long since sealed by command. That aircraft had been declared lost on a mission deep behind enemy lines, and the pilot listed. Kaialoe stared at him, eyes wide, with disbelief. "That's impossible, sir." Carter said nothing for a long moment, the sounds of the jungle fading into static in his ears. His mind replayed every maneuver from the strike, the precision, the timing, the voice on the radio calm and cold. That voice belonged to someone who had flown with him before someone who had saved his life once and vanished into the dark, leaving nothing but reports and silence. The realization dug into him hard and deep, whoever was flying, that A-10 was supposed to be dead. The team formed a defensive ring around the clearing while Carter scanned the riverbank for signs of movement. The mud was disturbed, a trail of prints leading away toward the rocks and into the forest again. Smaller prints, lighter steps, moving fast and deliberate. Someone had been here moments ago. They had landed, checked something, and vanished before the SEALs arrived. Carter's pulse quickened. He wanted to call out to the jungle, demand an answer, but instinct told him silence was safer. The men waited. Weapons. Raised the river, whispering slow beneath the trees. Then the radio crackled. Faint static rolling through like distant thunder. A single voice cut through, low, calm, and unmistakable. "You should not have followed Carter." Froze, every nerve locking tight. The men exchanged glances, weapons sweeping the tree line. The voice came again, clearer, now closer. "You're out of position, Lieutenant." The line went dead again, leaving only the whisper of the river and the hum of insects. Carter's heartbeat pounded in his ears. He turned toward the sound, but the jungle was still shadows stretching and swaying in the heat. Hayes low moved closer. His voice. Low. "Sir," that voice. "Who is it?" Carter looked toward the horizon through, the canopy light filtering across his face like ghost fire. He wanted to answer, but the truth caught in his throat. The name that haunted his thoughts was too heavy to speak out loud. The pilot he thought was gone had just spoken to him from somewhere, deep in the trees ahead. The jungle seemed to tighten around them, branches creaking, leaves whispering secrets carried by the wind. And in that, Carter led the team deeper into the forest, his instincts sharp and his nerves drawn like wire the air. Around them felt heavier, darker, as if the jungle itself knew what waited beyond the next ridge. Each man moved in silence, the only sound the soft crunch of boots against damp soil and the whisper of leaves brushing against their gear they followed. The faint prints through the undergrowth, careful not to disturb the trail. Every movement calculated, every glance, scanning for signs of ambush. The weight of the silence pressed down on them harder than gunfire, because silence meant the unseen was near. The prints ended at a clearing half hidden by mist. Rising from the wet ground, the sunlight above was broken by clouds and smoke that drifted low and slow across the treetops. The smell of fuel hung sharp and bitter in the air near the far side of the clearing. The remains of a small campsite were visible, a tarp scorched and torn, a fire pit still warm with faint embers. Someone had been here not long ago, and whoever it was had left in a hurry. Carter knelt beside the fire pit, running. His hand through the ashes, his glove came away smeared with grease and the faint metallic scent of jet oil. His jaw tightened because there was no mistaking it. This was no random survivor. This was the pilot. He signaled the team to spread out secure the perimeter and check for signs of direction. Lowe moved toward the ridge, scanning with his scope, while Reynolds knelt by the remnants of the tarp, inspecting the torn straps and the pattern of the cuts. Whoever had packed up had done so methodically, not in panic but with purpose. Reynolds glanced up and muttered under his breath, "They wanted us to find this." Sir Carter didn't answer, his eyes fixed on a piece of fabric caught beneath a root. He pulled it free and froze. The patch was faded, frayed, but the symbol was unmistakable, a winged skull, the insignia of a classified squadron decommissioned years ago. The forest grew still, too still. Even the insects seemed to quiet, as though waiting for something unseen. Lowe looked up from his scope, his expression uneasy. "Sir, we've got movement," he whispered. Shadows along the northern tree line, shapes moving low and steady. Carter raised his hand, motioning the men into cover rifles trained on the dark edge of the clearing. The mist thickened, rolling through the branches like smoke, swallowing the shapes until they were only flickers of motion. Carter's heartbeat thundered in his chest. Time stretched thin. Then a voice came through the radio again, clear, calm, and cold. "Stand down, Lieutenant." Every man froze. The sound cut through the static like a knife. Carter raised the radio slowly, his voice low, steady. "Identify yourself, silence." Then the voice returned, softer this time, closer. "We're on the same side. Stand down now." The mist shifted, and from the shadows stepped a figure, helmet under one arm, flight suit torn, streaked with mud and smoke, their eyes hidden behind the glare of light filtering through the haze. Carter lowered his weapon but didn't relax. The figure walked forward, boots sinking into the soft ground, stopping just short of the fire pit. "You shouldn't have followed," they said. Carter's breath caught in his throat. He knew that voice. He had heard it years ago during missions that no longer existed on record. He had heard it in radio chatter before an explosion that had erased a base and its pilots from the map. He whispered the name, barely audible across the clearing, "Evelyn Cross, call sign, Widowmaker." The figure smiled faintly and shook her head. "Not anymore," she said. "Now they call me Ghost." The men around Carter stared in stunned silence, unable to speak. The woman who had been declared dead 3 years ago stood alive before them. She looked at the team, her gaze sharp, calculating as if measuring each of them. And then her attention turned back to Carter. "You weren't supposed to see what happened," she said. "You weren't supposed to hear that strike." Carter stepped forward, refusing to back down. "You saved us. You came in alone." She nodded once, but her expression didn't change. That wasn't rescue, Lieutenant, that was containment. Before he could ask what she meant, the air split open with the sound breathless stillness. Carter realized that the real mission had just begun. The jungle was silent except for the hum of insects and the faint hiss of radios that crackled with static. The SEAL team had been deep in hostile territory for 72 hours, running low on ammo and energy. Sweat soaked their fatigues and mud clung to their boots as they crouched behind the ridge, eyes fixed on the valley below, where enemy patrols moved like shadows through the smoke of burning trees. The extraction window had closed hours ago, and the sound of gunfire had faded into a suffocating silence that pressed down on every thought, leaving them waiting for something to happen, something they could not yet see. Lieutenant Carter wiped grime from his eyes, scanning the tree line for movement. He could see the shapes of men. Through the fog, the flash of rifles and the glint of metal that meant they were surrounded. The enemy had numbers on their side, and the SEALs had only their discipline and their training. Each man knew the odds were gone, yet not one of them spoke the word retreat. The radio hissed again, carrying fragments of distorted orders, but the line was dead to command. The jungle closed around them like a fist, and Carter knew if they stayed silent for too long, the enemy would tighten that fist until there was no air left to breathe. They had been pinned for hours now, moving only when shadows allowed, crawling through mud to new positions, hoping to draw fire away from each other. The team had counted 8 enemy patrols closing from all sides, and the ammunition left could barely hold another assault. Sergeant Lowe checked the claymores, his hands steady though his breathing was shallow. The air smelled of oil and smoke and blood and the faint tang of fear that no training could erase. They waited in that stillness, every nerve stretched to breaking every heartbeat, counting down to the sound that would shatter it. Then the sound came faint at first, like thunder trapped behind mountains, a low rumble that grew until the very ground began to vibrate. The men froze, their weapons raised, scanning the tree line for movement. But the sound was not from the jungle. It came from the sky. Carter tilted his head, and the clouds above trembled with something immense. A roar, like metal, tearing the air apart. The team exchanged quick looks, none of them daring to speak, the hope rising in their throats because hope in a place like this was dangerous. It could kill faster than bullets if it was false. The roar grew louder, breaking through, the fog rolling over the trees until even the enemy stopped firing for a heartbeat. The jungle itself seemed to pause, the birds silent, the smoke hanging still. Then the first flash cut across the sky low and fast, a streak of steel slicing through. The gray A shape materialized through the haze, an A-10 Thunderbolt wings, wide guns gleaming like the edge of a blade. It was flying alone, no escort, no cover, and for a moment, no one could believe what they were seeing because no pilot was supposed to fly into a kill zone alone. Not like this. Not ever. Carter blinked once the sound of engines pounding against his chest like a second heartbeat. The radio crackled alive for the first time in hours, a single voice breaking through, calm, steady, and cold. The pilot gave no call sign, just coordinates a line of words, clipped and efficient. Then came silence before the sky tore open. The A-10 dropped low, so low the leaves bent under its wake, and the GAU-8 gun screamed fire in long metallic bursts that shook the ground. The enemy patrols scattered bodies diving for cover as the air itself turned to thunder and dust filled the valley. The SEALs watched from behind their ridge eyes, wide the weapon in Carter's hands forgotten. The plane moved, with impossible precision cutting through smoke and trees in tight arcs as if the pilot had memorized the terrain itself. Rounds shredded the enemy line in ribbons of dirt and flame, each pass closer than the last. The team huddled tighter there, ears ringing their chests, rattling with each strike. The radio hissed again, but this time the voice came with quiet intensity. Hold your position. The men obeyed without thought, because there was something in that voice, something that carried authority, and calm beyond rank or protocol. The A-10 screamed past again, tracing lines of fire across the jungle. The enemy tried to regroup their gunfire, desperate, wild, inaccurate. The ground split open with explosions, throwing soil and smoke high into the canopy. The team could only watch, feeling the vibration of power rippling through the earth beneath their knees, as though the jungle itself had come alive. Then, just as sudden as it began, the sky fell silent again. Smoke rose in thick waves through. The trees and the faint echo of engines faded into distance. Carter dared a glance over the ridge through the shifting haze of burning foliage. He could see bodies scattered through the valley, the remnants of weapons and gear torn apart by the force of the strikes. The rest of the enemy had vanished, retreating into the tree line, leaving only silence behind. The SEALs waited, unsure if it was over, unsure if they were saved or marked. The radio hissed again, a single word breaking the quiet. Checkpoints clear. Then nothing. The line went dead, and the jungle fell back into its rhythm. Wind through leaves and distant thunder beyond the horizon. Carter turned to his men, their faces smeared with mud and disbelief, each of them searching for words that would not come. The sound of the A-10 still echoed faintly in their bones, a sound that did not belong to survival, but to something far larger. The team waited, listening for its return. The smoke still hung heavy above the valley, twisting through the shattered trees as the seals crept from their cover. Their boots sank into the scorched soil, the air thick with the smell of oil and cordite. Lieutenant Carter raised a clenched fist, signaling the men to halt. They scanned the jungle, weapons ready, listening for movement, but there was nothing. No sound, no wind, no birds. Just the faint hum of cooling metal and the distant echo of engines fading somewhere beyond the horizon. It felt unnatural, like the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for what came next. Sergeant Lowe crouched near a fallen log, checking the perimeter, his eyes sharp under the shadow of his helmet. He turned to Carter, whispering low enough that only the nearest man could hear. Whoever flew that bird knew exactly where we were. The rest of the team exchanged uneasy glances. No coordinates had been transmitted. No call for air support had gone out since the radios had gone dead hours earlier. Yet the A-10 had arrived precise to the meter precise. To the second, it had hit every target without touching them once. And that kind of accuracy meant one thing. Someone up there knew. Their playbook, knew their calls, knew them. Carter knelt beside the burned earth where enemy rifles lay twisted and broken by heat. His hands brushed the dirt and metal, and he could feel the faint vibration of the last strike still pulsing through the ground. The pilot had flown low enough to risk trees, small arms, and terrain. The GAU-8 cannon had chewed through enemy lines, but every burst had curved around their coordinates like the hand of a ghost, guiding it. Carter straightened, looking toward the smoke trail where the A-10 had vanished. He could still hear the echo of engines in his head, steady, relentless, familiar yet impossibly distant. They regrouped along the ridge, counting ammunition supplies losses. The team had survived without a single casualty, something that should have been impossible under that much fire. Lowe muttered under his breath, "Maybe. That was luck." Carter shook his head. Slow, deliberate. "There's no luck like that in this place. Not with that timing, not with that precision." He looked up through the gaps in the canopy, where the smoke thinned into sunlight. The sky was clear now, too clear. The radio lay silent at his belt until suddenly it hissed again with static, and one faint voice, barely a whisper, "Hold position." The sound was faint, distorted, but it was the same voice from before. Calm, steady, carrying the tone of command. The team froze, eyes meeting across the ridge. No one dared speak. The message repeated once, slower this time. "Hold position, extraction inbound." Then the line went dead again. Carter looked at the men and saw the unspoken question in their faces. Extraction. From who command was silent, the operation was black. Even the call sign for their team had been scrubbed from the network before deployment. Whoever that voice belonged to, it was not from the list of authorized contacts. It was someone off the grid. They waited motionless for minutes that felt like hours. The jungle began to move again, wind shifting through the leaves, insects returning to their rhythm, the distant crackle of fire fading into the background. Carter kept scanning the sky, his pulse steady, but his nerves wired. Then he heard it faint, at first low, and rolling across the distance. The men looked up in unison as the sound grew louder, rumbling closer until the treetops began to shake. The same roar that had saved them once returned, but this time slower, lower, more deliberate. Branches shuddered under the force of the air as the A-10 emerged from the haze, flying low along the valley floor. The sunlight caught its steel skin, turning it into a glinting blade, slicing through the air. Its engines screamed a controlled fury, vibrating through the ground and into their chests. The team stood frozen as the jet made a slow pass over their heads, barely 50 feet above the ridge. The pilot tilted the wings slightly, a gesture so small it could have been missed, but Carter saw it a deliberate acknowledgement, a silent salute, before the plane banked and climbed sharply, disappearing again into the clouds. No one spoke for a long time when the roar faded. Carter looked at Lowe, his expression unreadable. "That wasn't a coincidence," he said. Finally, Lowe nodded quietly. "Whoever that is, they knew us." Carter's gaze drifted back toward the horizon. The pilot had risked everything flying so.